Hello, and welcome to the worldwarlab channel. Today's story sounds almost unreal, but every part of it is grounded in history. In 1918, the German government sent an official diplomatic protest to the United States. It was not a warning. It was not a suggestion. It was a demand. Germany insisted that America immediately stop using a particular weapon on the battlefield. They declared it a violation of the laws of war and openly threatened that any American soldier captured while carrying this weapon would be executed on the spot. What made this protest so shocking was the weapon itself. It was not a new form of poison gas. It was not an artillery shell or some secret experimental device pulled from a laboratory. It was a shotgun, a pump-action shotgun originally designed for hunting ducks. The irony was staggering. This complaint came from the same nation that had introduced chlorine gas to the battlefield. The same army that used flamethrowers to burn enemy soldiers alive inside their trenches. The same military that equipped its troops with serrated bayonets designed not to cut cleanly, but to tear flesh apart. And yet, that country filed a formal diplomatic protest over a hunting weapon. And they were deadly serious. The story of the Winchester Model 1897 is one of the strangest chapters in military history. It is the story of how an ordinary sporting gun became so terrifying that an empire tried to have it banned and failed. The Winchester Model 1897 was designed by John Moses Browning, the same legendary firearms designer who would later create the M1911 pistol and the Browning automatic rifle. When Browning designed the shotgun, war was the last thing on his mind. It was built for hunters, for shooting birds and small game. It belonged on farms and in open fields, not in trenches filled with mud and blood. The gun held 6 shells in a tubular magazine. Each shell was loaded with 9 pellets of double-aught buckshot. Each individual pellet was .33 caliber, roughly the same diameter as a 9mm bullet. With a single pull of the trigger, 9 projectiles were launched downrange at the same time. But that alone was not what made the weapon infamous. This is where the Winchester became something entirely different. The Model 1897 had no trigger disconnector. Most modern shotguns require the shooter to release the trigger before firing the next round. This one did not. If the shooter held the trigger down and pumped the action, the gun fired instantly every time the bolt closed. This feature became known as slam fire. A trained soldier could empty all 6 rounds in approximately 2 seconds. That meant 54 lead pellets filling the air almost simultaneously. Soldiers learned to fire the weapon from the hip, pumping the action as fast as their arms could move. The recoil stopped being a problem and instead became part of the rhythm. The gun weighed about 8 pounds, roughly 3.5 kilograms. Its effective range was only 20 to 30 meters. In an open field, that would have been a severe limitation. Inside a trench barely 4 feet wide, with walls of dirt on both sides, it was perfection. German soldiers quickly gave the weapon nicknames. They called it the trench sweeper, the trench broom, names that described exactly what it did inside a narrow corridor packed with men. If you're finding this story interesting, take a moment to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. A like genuinely helps this channel bring you more stories like this one. It only takes 2 seconds. Now, back to 1917. Here is the question that puzzled military historians for years. The Winchester Model 1897 had existed for 2 decades before the United States entered the First World War. It sat quietly in gun shops and farmhouses across America. Millions of civilians used it to hunt birds every year. So how did a duck gun end up in the trenches of France? And who made the decision to put it there? That decision came from a general who had already seen what shotguns could do, long before Europe went to war. On the other side of the world, General John Joseph Pershing, known by the nickname Blackjack, had earned his reputation commanding African-American cavalry units in the American West. By 1917, he was the most experienced combat commander in the United States Army. And he remembered the Philippines. In 1900, American forces were fighting the Moro people in the Southern Islands. The Moros were Muslim warriors, and some of them practiced a ritual form of combat known as juramentado. These fighters would tightly bind their limbs to slow blood loss, say their prayers, and then charge American positions armed with bladed weapons. Their goal was simple: kill as many enemies as possible before dying themselves. Standard army rifles were failing. A determined warrior could absorb multiple bullet wounds and continue advancing. Officers began searching for a weapon with immediate stopping power. They found it in shotguns. A blast of buckshot at close range accomplished what rifle bullets often could not. It ended charges instantly. It stopped attackers who seemed immune to individual rounds. Pershing witnessed this firsthand. He observed it, understood it, and filed it away in his memory. 16 years later, he saw the same lesson repeated. In 1916, Pershing led American forces into Mexico during the hunt for the revolutionary leader Pancho Villa. The campaign was exhausting and frustrating. Villa's men knew the terrain intimately. They struck in ambushes and disappeared just as quickly. When American troops did manage to catch them, the fighting was sudden, violent, and at extremely close range. Once again, shotguns proved their worth. Not for long-distance engagements, but for those explosive moments when enemies appeared without warning just a few meters away. Then, in April 1917, the United States declared war on Germany. Pershing was appointed commander of the American Expeditionary Forces. He would lead 2 million men to France, and he knew exactly what awaited them. He had read the reports. Trench warfare, narrow passages, hand-to-hand fighting in confined spaces, raids conducted in darkness. It was precisely the kind of environment where shotguns had worked before. He wanted them. But hunting shotguns were not military weapons. They needed changes. In September 1917, an engineer from Georgia named William G. Ypres submitted a detailed report. Ypres had studied the problem carefully. His proposal was straightforward: take commercial shotguns and adapt them specifically for trench warfare. Add a ventilated metal handguard so soldiers could grip a barrel that had grown dangerously hot. Install a bayonet mount so the weapon could be used for stabbing once ammunition was exhausted. Shorten the barrel to allow easier movement through tight, twisting passages. The Army approved the proposal. Winchester received contracts. Remington did as well. The Winchester Model 1897 was transformed into the Model 1897 trench gun. By June 1918, the Army had allocated 50 shotguns to every division deploying to France. At first glance, 50 guns per division does not sound like much. But the Army never intended to arm entire units with shotguns. Instead, they chose specific soldiers. Men who had hunted birds back home. Men who understood how to lead a moving target without thinking. Men who could pump and fire on instinct alone. They were called shotgunners. And they were sent into the trenches of the Western Front. By that point, German soldiers had been fighting for 4 years. They had faced everything the British and French could throw at them. Machine guns, heavy artillery, tanks, poison gas. They believed they had seen it all. They had never encountered anything like what came next. A trench on the Western Front was not a battlefield in the traditional sense. It was a maze. Narrow passages carved into mud and clay. Some sections were 4 feet wide, some even narrower. Corners appeared every few meters. Blind turns, dead ends, dugouts carved directly into the walls where men slept, waited, and tried to survive. When soldiers went over the top, they crossed open ground under machine gun fire. But once they reached the enemy trench, the entire nature of combat changed. Rifles became clumsy. They were built for accuracy at hundreds of meters. In a corridor where a man could touch both walls with outstretched arms, accuracy was irrelevant. Speed mattered more than anything. The Winchester Model 1897 was built for exactly this environment. Its effective range of 20 to 30 meters was perfect in a trench that bent and twisted just a few corners ahead. Far enough to hit enemies before they could close the distance. close enough that the spread of buckshot filled the passage completely. A rifle bullet could miss. A pistol demanded precise aim under extreme stress. A shotgun blast, by contrast, spread to nearly a meter wide at 20 meters. In a corridor barely 4 feet across, missing was almost impossible. And then there was the rate of fire. A bolt-action rifle required the shooter to work the bolt between every shot. Fire. Cycle. Aim again. Even a well-trained soldier could manage perhaps 15 rounds per minute. A shotgunner armed with a Winchester could unleash 54 projectiles into a section of trench in 2 seconds. The mathematics of that reality were horrifying. A contemporary account described what happened when German assault troops finally encountered American shotgunners head-on. The Americans waited. They let the Germans move closer, closing the distance inside the narrow trenches. Then the shotguns opened fire. 200 men firing 6 rounds each, reloading, then firing again. According to the account, the front ranks of the assault force simply collapsed, piling up into a single horrific mound of men torn apart by buckshot. The Germans found a name for what they were facing. They began calling the Americans something that would stick. Teufelshunden. Devil dogs. Some historians argue over whether the term originated at Belleau in June 1918, but what is not disputed is this. The Marines who fought there were carrying Winchesters, and the German soldiers facing them were genuinely terrified. The shotgunners developed tactics that seemed almost unreal. Many of them had been competitive trap shooters before the war. They had spent years tracking clay pigeons launched into the air at unpredictable angles, learning instinctive lead and timing. Now they applied that skill to combat. German soldiers threw stick grenades. The grenades had a fuse of roughly 5 seconds. A trained trap shooter could track a grenade in flight, judge its arc, lead the target, and fire. There are documented accounts of shotgunners blasting grenades out of the air before they could land, knocking them back toward German lines, turning a hunting skill into a deadly reflex. Explosives became targets. Combat became a brutal game of timing and nerve. The trench gun earned its nicknames. Sweeper. Tools designed to clear confined spaces. The men who carried them became specialists, hunters moving through a maze of mud, timber, and darkness. And the German high command noticed. Long before the famous diplomatic protest of 1918, concerns had already been raised. As early as December 1914, Germany had complained about the use of shotguns. This was before the United States had even entered the war. Before a single American soldier set foot in France. German officials saw what was coming, and they were already afraid. That fear was about to turn into something else. Desperation. The first German complaint about American shotguns was filed in December 1914. Pause on that date for a moment. December 1914. The United States would not declare war on Germany until April 1917. American troops would not arrive in France in meaningful numbers until 1918. And yet, more than 2 years before an American fired a shot in the Great War, Germany was already protesting. They had seen shotguns used by American forces in the Philippines. They had read reports from Mexico. They understood what Pershing understood, and they wanted those weapons banned before they ever reached European soil. The complaint went nowhere. America was neutral. There was no battlefield to debate. But Germany had made its position unmistakably clear. They considered shotguns barbaric, uncivilized, a violation of the accepted rules of warfare. The irony was almost absurd. By December 1914, Germany had already experimented with poison gas on the Eastern Front. Within months, they would unleash chlorine gas at Ypres, killing thousands of French and Algerian soldiers. They were developing flamethrowers designed to cook men alive in their defensive positions. Their standard-issue bayonet featured serrated teeth along the back edge, intentionally engineered to create wounds that could not be easily stitched closed. But the shotgun was too far. By the summer of 1918, American forces were fully engaged on the Western Front, and the shotguns had arrived with them. June 1918. Below Wood. A forest that would become legendary in the history of the United States Marine Corps. German forces held fortified positions among the trees, machine gun nests with overlapping fields of fire. The French had already attacked and failed to take the position. The Marines went in. Some of them carried Winchesters. The fighting at Below Wood lasted nearly a month. It was brutal, close combat in dense forest, exactly the environment where a trench gun thrived. The Germans were seasoned veterans. They had held that ground against repeated French and British attacks. But something about these Americans was different. Reports began filtering back to German command. American shotgunners were clearing positions that should have been impossible to take. Soldiers who had survived years of artillery barrages and infantry assaults were being overwhelmed in seconds. Buckshot tore through undergrowth and bodies alike, striking multiple men with a single blast. German soldiers began making calculations of their own. If they saw a shotgunner advancing, they had two options: stand and fight, facing 54 projectiles in 2 seconds, or surrender. Many chose surrender. The psychological effect became as powerful as the physical destruction. German troops knew the sound of rifle fire. They recognized machine guns. They understood artillery. The blast of a shotgun was different. Deeper, closer, more personal. It meant someone was coming down the trench to kill them at arm's length. By September 1918, the war was turning decisively against Germany. Their spring offensive had failed. American troops were arriving faster than they could be stopped. The end was approaching. And then, in a village somewhere along the Western Front, a single American sergeant decided to do something that should have been impossible. His name was Fred Lloyd, and he was carrying a Winchester. September 1918. The Western Front was collapsing for Germany. The 100 Days Offensive was grinding forward without pause. Allied forces were pushing through villages and small towns that had remained behind German lines for 4 long years. In one of those villages, a German garrison was still holding its ground. The exact location has been lost to history. The precise number of German soldiers stationed there was never recorded. What was recorded is what happened next. Sergeant Fred Lloyd advanced into the village alone. He carried a Winchester Model 1897. 6 shells loaded in the magazine. His pockets heavy with additional ammunition. He moved down the main street without a squad at his back, without covering fire from a machine gun team. Alone. And he began clearing buildings. The accounts describe his method in just 2 words: pumping and firing. He would approach a position, work the action, pull the trigger. Work the action again, pull the trigger again. The distinctive rhythm of slam fire echoed off stone walls and shattered doorways. One man entered an occupied village and walked out the other side. Think about what that means. A garrison of trained soldiers. Men armed with rifles and machine guns. Veterans who had survived 4 years of the deadliest conflict humanity had ever seen. And a single American, armed with a shotgun, moved straight through them. The Winchester gave him something no other infantry weapon could offer a lone soldier. Speed and volume of fire. A rifle required careful aim for every shot. A pistol carried limited ammunition and demanded precision under stress. A shotgun with slam fire could fill an entire room with lead before anyone inside had time to react. Fred Lloyd became a legend. His action was reported up the chain of command. The story spread through American units as proof of what the trench gun was capable of. And the Germans heard about it too. After the war, a journalist named Peter P. Carney tried to explain why the shotgun had become so feared. Carney was the editor of the National Sports Syndicate, a man deeply familiar with firearms and hunting culture. He had watched the trench gun transform from ordinary sporting equipment into an instrument of terror. He wrote that the shotgun was America's greatest contribution to the war. Greater than the millions of fresh troops. Greater than industrial production and logistics. The shotgun, he argued, carried more terror into the hearts of the enemy than any other instrument of destruction used by the Allies. Then he added a line that perfectly captured the German fear. "The only umbrella that will assist anyone when the trench shotgun is showering pellets over the universe," he wrote, "is an armored tank." An armored tank. That was what it took to feel safe from a weapon designed to shoot ducks. By mid-September 1918, German commanders had reached a breaking point. Their soldiers were terrified. Defensive positions were being cleared by shotgunners. Morale was collapsing. Something had to be done. So they acted. On September 19, 1918, the German government took an extraordinary step. They sent an official diplomatic protest through the Swiss embassy. They invoked international law. They issued demands. And they made a threat unlike any other issued during the entire war. They threatened to execute prisoners. The document arrived at the United States State Department through official channels. Switzerland, a neutral nation, served as the intermediary, carrying messages between governments that were actively trying to destroy one another. The protest was formal, legalistic, and completely unprecedented. The German government cited Article 23, Section E of the Hague Convention of 1907. That article prohibited the use of weapons calculated to cause unnecessary suffering. Germany argued that shotgun wounds met this definition. Multiple projectiles tearing through flesh at the same moment. Wounds that were difficult or impossible to treat. Suffering beyond what was militarily required. The language of the protest was precise, cold, and chilling. The German government protests against the use of shotguns by the American army and calls attention to the fact that, according to the law of war, every prisoner found to have in his possession such guns or ammunition belonging thereto forfeits his life. Read that last part again. Forfeits his life. Germany was not threatening imprisonment. They were not threatening a tribunal or court-martial. They were threatening summary execution. Any American soldier captured with a shotgun would be shot. Any American soldier captured with shotgun shells in his pockets would be shot. No trial. No appeal. No other weapon used during the entire war had provoked such a threat. Not machine guns that could kill hundreds in minutes. Not artillery that erased entire battalions from existence. Not poison gas that left men drowning in the fluid filling their own lungs. Not flamethrowers that burned soldiers alive in their trenches. Only the shotgun. The protest included a deadline. Germany demanded a response from the United States by October 1, 1918. 12 days. If America did not agree to withdraw shotguns from service, Germany would begin executions. The calculation behind the protest was brutally clear. Germany was losing the war. The end was measured in weeks or months. But they still held hundreds of thousands of Allied prisoners. If they could force the United States to abandon the shotgun, they could die knowing they had at least removed the weapon they feared most. With at least one small victory. And there was a darker logic behind it as well. German soldiers were surrendering when they saw shotgunners advancing. If captured Americans faced execution simply for carrying shotguns, perhaps American troops would stop using them altogether. Fear, after all, could be made to work in both directions. The protest landed on the desk of Secretary of State Robert Lansing. Lansing was a lawyer by training, careful, methodical, and not easily intimidated. He read the German demands and consulted with military legal advisors. Brigadier General Samuel T. Ansel was assigned the task of preparing the official response. Ansel was serving as the acting Judge Advocate General of the Army. His responsibility was to determine whether American weapons violated international law. He studied the Hague Convention in detail. He examined the technical specifications of the Winchester shotgun. He reviewed the German arguments line by line, and then he began assembling a counterattack. The deadline was October 1st. The response had to be ready in days. And it had to be more than a simple refusal. Germany had threatened American lives. The United States was about to threaten back. The American response arrived before the deadline. It was not an apology. It was not a negotiation. It was a methodical dismantling of the German position. Brigadier General Ansel laid out the argument with legal precision. The Hague Convention prohibited weapons that caused unnecessary suffering. The critical word was unnecessary. All weapons caused suffering. The real question was whether that suffering served a legitimate military purpose. Ansel pointed out that shotgun wounds were not fundamentally different from injuries caused by other accepted weapons. Artillery shrapnel produced multiple wound channels. Machine gun fire could strike a single soldier several times in a matter of seconds. If the presence of multiple projectiles was grounds for declaring a weapon illegal, then half the arms in use on the Western Front would have been banned. But the American response did not stop with legal reasoning. Secretary Lansing authorized a direct counterargument. If Germany wanted to discuss weapons that caused unnecessary suffering, the United States was prepared with examples. Chlorine gas. Germany had introduced it at Ypres in April 1915. Men died choking as their lungs filled with fluid. Survivors suffered permanent damage for the rest of their lives. Germany had signed the Hague Convention and then released poison into the wind. Phosgene gas. Even deadlier than chlorine and almost odorless. By the time soldiers realized they had been exposed, it was already too late. They drowned from the inside. Flamethrowers. German flamethrowers units had been burning men alive in their trenches since 1915. The screams carried for hundreds of meters across the battlefield. Saw-toothed bayonets. Standard German issue, designed to create wounds that could not be closed, engineered to maximize bleeding. The American message was unmistakable. You do not lecture us about a hunting shotgun while your own soldiers carry weapons designed for maximum cruelty. The argument is finished. Then came the threat. If Germany executed a single American prisoner for carrying a shotgun, the United States would retaliate. The specifics were deliberately left unstated. They did not need to be explained. Germany held American prisoners. America held German prisoners. The mathematics of vengeance were obvious. Germany blinked. Not a single American soldier was executed for carrying a shotgun. Not one. The threat disappeared. The protest faded into a footnote of history. 44 days after the German protest, the war ended. November 11, 1918. The guns fell silent, but the Winchester Model 1897 did not. 23 years later, December 1941. Pearl Harbor. America was at war again. This time the fighting was in the Pacific. Jungle combat on Guadalcanal. Island-hopping campaigns. Iwo Jima. Okinawa. Close quarters fighting in dense vegetation. Bunkers. Tunnel systems. Exactly the kind of environment where a shotgun once again proved its worth. Marines remembered what their fathers had carried. They requested Winchesters. They stole them from Navy ships before amphibious landings, whatever it took to get their hands on trench guns. On Guadalcanal in 1942, Major General Alexander Patch personally led an attack, not armed with a pistol, not a carbine, but a Winchester shotgun. A general in the jungle carrying a duck gun. On August 17, 1942, Sergeant Clyde Thomason used his Winchester to assault Japanese positions on Matanicaw Island. He became one of the first American heroes of the Pacific War. The weapon Germany had tried to ban was still killing enemies a generation later. The Winchester Model 1897 remained in American military service for nearly a century. From the Philippine insurrection at the turn of the 20th century to the jungles of Vietnam in the 1960s, and even with some units into the 1990s, shotguns continued to be carried into combat. Almost 100 years of continuous service. More than 1 million Model 1897 shotguns were manufactured between 1897 and 1957. By the end of the Second World War, the American military had purchased approximately 500,000 shotguns of all types. The weapon Germany had tried to outlaw became standard equipment. And among the Marines, a ritual developed. Before amphibious landings, they would raid the armories of Navy ships. Shotguns were supposed to be distributed through official supply channels. The Marines did not wait for official channels. They took what they needed. Officers looked the other way. Everyone understood what awaited them on those beaches. Korea. The shotgun followed American soldiers into every conflict that came after. The tactics changed. Missions evolved. Technology advanced. But the core principle never disappeared. When fighting became close, when corridors were narrow, when darkness hid the enemy, nothing cleared a space faster or more decisively than a 12-gauge loaded with buckshot. And the German protest became a dark joke. A grim footnote passed from soldier to soldier in foxholes and bunkers. The nation that invented modern chemical warfare complained about a duck gun. The army that burned men alive decided buckshot was too cruel. Pause for a moment and think about what that actually means. In 4 years of industrialized slaughter, the weapon that frightened Germany the most was not the tank, not the airplane, not the submarine. It was a pump-action shotgun designed by John Browning for American hunters. 54 pellets in 2 seconds. That was enough to make an empire file a formal diplomatic protest. That was enough to make them threaten executions. That was enough to make hardened soldiers choose surrender over combat. The Winchester Model 1897 is no longer in military service. Modern combat shotguns have replaced it. But the design principles remain. The psychology remains. When soldiers need to clear a room, they still reach for a shotgun. And somewhere in that lineage is a September day in 1918, a formal document passing through Swiss diplomatic channels, a threat of execution, an American refusal, and 44 days later, silence on the Western Front. John Browning designed his shotgun to hunt birds. He could never have imagined what it would become. He could not have predicted that his duck gun would terrify a generation of German soldiers, that it would prompt the only execution threat of the entire war, that it would still be killing enemies half a century after his death. The trench sweeper, the trench broom, the devil's weapon, just a shotgun. If this story was worth your time, hit that like button. It tells the algorithm to show this video to more people who care about history. Subscribe and click the notification bell so you don't miss what we cover next. And leave a comment. Where are you watching from right now? And here's a question for you. What other so-called primitive weapons should we cover next? Bows in medieval warfare? Bayonets? Knives? Let us know. These stories deserve to be remembered. Thank you for watching.